The very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier Podcast.
Every horse, whatever it was doing, had a season. Once their competition season finished, they took the shoes off, they chucked it out in the field with some other horses, and it had a 2, maybe 3 months period where it went and remembered what being a horse was all about.
Even in a cheaper area, your prices should be set by your skill level, by your experience. And some people might not feel that they're worth, as much as others. But if you're only charging $160 to shoe a horse, then the only way you're making money is on your trims.
The WCB was a way to make sure that you kept the trade alive. I think I'm a custodian of the trade, so it's like we have to keep it going.
It was hard, but you adapt and overcome, and probably gets to me where I am now. It's problem solving, horseshoeing's problem solving, and back in the day it was problem solving how to be as strong as the older apprentice is. So it's all about adapting and overcoming, which was good.
I know we learn every day, but you do have to put yourself outside the box and just continue to learn, which is why I was just trying to do my fellowship, because I still have apprentices, and if I stay at my AW, I'm stagnant.
As you probably noticed, this episode is a little bit early compared to my 2-week schedule that I've been maintaining thus far. This is a bit of a public service announcement, a PSA, if you will, because I feel like this topic is really important. It's really affecting us right now. And as in all business things, who better to explain it to us than Andrew DeVisser? You may have heard his previous episodes where he has shed a bit of light onto the business and financial end of things in what we do. And every year, Andrew hosts a small forging clinic at his home, and then his wife makes us a wonderful lunch, and then afterwards he always does a business talk. And this year, I asked if I could record it and then share it with you guys. Andrew agreed, but part of the deal was that instead of him asking himself the questions, he had me do that part of the job. There were a couple of audience questions that I was unable to really record, but Andrew does a pretty good job of repeating what they say, so you'll get the gist of it. Anyway, I hope you find this informative and enjoy it as much as I did. So the title of this is Inflation, Its Causes and Effects, and How to Plan for It. So why is it important to talk about inflation, Andrew?
So it's not really a fun topic. And I think most of us would just really rather bury our heads in the sand, if we're being honest, right? Then think about how much prices are going up and how we need to respond to that. Inflation is almost always present, even at the best of times, and it's really important for knowing how to run a business.
How does inflation affect us as farriers?
Okay, so there's 2 main ways. It affects the cost to run our business, right? When we go out and shoe horses, the cost to run a business is going up. Okay, then there's the personal side as well of inflation. When you go to the grocery store or whatever, your personal expenses, those are all going up, right? So it's hitting you on both sides. So I want you to think about the purchasing power of shoeing one horse. So when you shoe a horse, you have to put money out. You have expenses, right? You have your fuel, you have your shoes, all that stuff. Then you go, you shoe the horse, you get paid. And then with that money, you're going to buy something, say groceries, right? Let's keep it nice and simple. When you're shoeing the horse, your expenses, all the stuff it takes to shoe that horse, your fuel, your shoes, etc., all of that stuff is going up. And that eats into the dollar amount that you're taking home, right? So not only that, not only do you have less dollars as a result of inflation, but when you go to spend those dollars and buy your groceries or whatever, you're going to be able to buy less groceries for those dollars because those have gone up in price. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, good. I like to start very basic.
It helps people like me. Can you talk to us about a few of our business and personal expenses and how much they are going up?
Yeah, so I did some research on this, and it's pretty wild. especially in the last couple of years, right? Since COVID, I think we all know that. But groceries have gone up a lot. A lot of the prices for things like meat and some of the stuff that was already dear are up 30 or 40% over pre-COVID prices. A lot of dairy prices are up 20 to 30%. For most farriers, fuel is our biggest expense, and then supplies as well. Some of those, it's more than the other. Fuel in Canada here is up about 60% over a couple of years ago. And versus the low last year, it's up over 100%. Good times.
I was going to lower my prices since fuel was so cheap back then.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank goodness that didn't go through.
That's right. Yeah, I know. You would have had to explain that to your clients twice, right? Yeah. The second conversation would have been a lot less comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you remember how I cut the prices in half? Now I'm quadrupling them. Yeah. New vehicles, if anyone's had to buy a new vehicle, they're up about 16% over 2 years ago. Here's one that's really interesting to all of us, farrier supplies. So I spoke with Andre, the guy who runs our local farrier supply store. And on a normal year, farrier expenses go up about 2 to 3% per year. So that's pretty normal. And this is, if you actually map out what 2 to 3% of your costs are, it's quite a lot. So that's a normal year. Okay. Since the pandemic, they've had price increases of 10 to 40% on most items. Okay. Some of them are more than double what they were pre-pandemic prices. So they've had price increases from some of the largest companies that supply most of their shoes and nails. So he named me 2 big companies. Each of these companies put their prices up twice last year and 3 times the year before. So a total of 5 price increases. Each increase was 5 to 10%. Each increase. So you start doing some quick math on that. It's a whole lot, isn't it? One thing to note as well, right? A lot of our expenses, especially something like the money you put out at the farrier supply store, they're not getting rich off of this either. The same as us, right? Their expenses are going up a lot. It's basically those prices are put to them by their suppliers, right?
And I know they've actually, at points, and I'm sure you guys have seen this, they held back in increasing them because they didn't want a mutiny from us. But yeah, over time, they just would have to give us a warning. We could buy the old stock, but anything new coming in was going to cost them that much more. So it either cuts into their margin or they raise the price.
Yeah, and the amount of work that they do at Professional to actually hold prices as low as they can for as long as they can is actually, it's pretty astronomical. They really do a lot. So when their prices are going up, they'll see whatever they can do. They'll buy before the prices go up so they can have that inventory for us for as long as possible. Sometimes they'll be able to get like bulk discounts. And so they'll look and see what they can do, right? Because you can't buy everything in bulk. And bulk for a supply store is a lot. It's not like us buying, 10 boxes of nails. Yes. Right. So, but yeah, they do a lot to try to maintain our prices. Yeah.
So why, Andrew, are things going up in price so much? Is this normal?
No. So the short and oversimplified answer is that the government printed a lot of money to help the country out during the pandemic. And printing a lot of money dilutes the purchasing power of that money. Does that make sense? If you have lemonade and you dump in twice the amount of water than you're supposed to, the amount of lemonade in there, so in this analogy, the amount of purchasing power is the same, but you have to drink twice as much to get it. So not only that, when the government printed a bunch of money and handed a bunch of money out, that increased demand for goods and services because people had more money. Because of that, supply and demand, right? Because the demand was increased, prices went up on a lot of stuff. So it kind of hit it on both sides.
Yeah, and the supplies, as we know, were a struggle to get. So that made stuff even more appealing to people.
For sure. Yeah.
I noticed even with vehicles, you couldn't wheel and deal with a car dealer. It was full sticker price because it was the only one in the province kind of thing.
Yeah, and sometimes used vehicle prices, sometimes it was cheaper to buy new, but you had to wait for it, right? That was the catch. We've got one here. It's used. You can pay more than sticker price for it, or you can wait and get a brand new one. Crazy.
Who thought your vehicle would go up in price when you had a used vehicle? Does that ever happen? So what happens if we ignore inflation?
Okay, so to illustrate this, as farriers, I want to share something that I found last year. This was a price list of a farrier. in an area that I work in, and it was posted on the wall of the barn. Okay. And I'm going to actually go through some of these. I'm not going to give the name. It wasn't anyone here. Okay. So this was posted last year, and this was a price increase notification. Okay. So these are prices in Canadian dollars. So for a front reset, basically the prices were given as a round figure, but they included tax. So the prices that I'm going to be giving you are pre-tax numbers. Make sense? Okay, so for a front reset, $97.34. For new front shoes, $119.46. For a full reset, a little over $132. And for 4 new shoes, $172. Okay, now this gets even more interesting, okay? Pads are $885 and sole packing is $885. So I looked this up. At Professional Farrier Supply, a cheap pair of leather pads costs $9.55. Anyone see a problem here?
You're upside down.
You're upside down. Yeah, you're totally underwater. If you ignore inflation, which is unfortunately happening here, you end up undercharging for your work. And this has some really serious detriments. You have to do more horses for the same purchasing power. This takes more time. It's harder physically on you. I don't think that's a shock to anyone, right? Since you do more horses, it's hard to be on time, to keep track of all the clients. And it's hard to make your clients feel valued as well, right? At the end of the day, every business is about the people. So you can't forget that aspect of it as well. It lowers the perceived value of the industry as a whole, right? If we're undercharging for our work. It makes it harder for farriers who are trying to charge a fair price, right? Because we end up, whether purposefully or not, you can end up undercutting them. Being busy and having less money makes continuing education feel like a luxury that you can't afford, right? So I've seen this happen a number of times where they started out charging really excellent money and then they just never put their prices up. And inflation just kept on marching every single year. And these people went from having extra money that they could spend on stuff like continuing education to just really working way too hard just to scrape by. And they didn't have the time or the money to be able to spend on that. Again, it felt like a luxury that they couldn't afford.
Yeah, an interesting way Andrew kind of taught me to think about it is even when the levels weren't as crazy as they are now of inflation, if you didn't raise your prices on a continuing basis, you actually started to work for a discount over time. So you actually, if you were working a real job, you were getting a pay cut every year. And it's hard to think of that when you have the cash coming through and going out the other side. But if you actually sit back and think of the concept of it, you're actually taking a pay cut every year.
Every year you don't put your prices up. Yep. Yeah, because most jobs, right, if you work an office job, it might not be every year, but usually you're getting regular cost of living increases.
I mean, that's what some of the union stuff that's happening right now. They're trying to increase their per year percentages.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, what does it cost to shoe a horse? Do you know?
You guys ready for this? I actually don't know. Not even kidding.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So I've never actually sat down to figure out what it costs me to shoe a horse. So what I look at is the profit and loss sheet at the end of the year. And so I could figure it out if I went through, I know what the total cost to me, my business is over a year, and I could go through and pencil out how many horses I did and figure out exactly what it costs. But no, I know what my margins are, but I do not know what it cost me to shoe one horse.
He's too busy making forges.
That's right.
So what is a good way to go about setting a price?
I think there's 3 main components in setting a price. The first one is our expenses, like we've been talking about, right? This kind of sets the base level price. And wherever you go in the world, or even the area in Ontario here, or wherever, your expenses are going to be different based on how easily you can get supplies, how cheap those supplies are, how cheap or expensive fuel is, all these different things, right? How far you have to drive. There's some areas in the world where people could practically walk to their clients. Some places where they have to drive much further than we do, right? So, but your expenses, that sets the base level. On top of that, there's your skill level, right? So as your skill level increases, that should add a premium. And then what other farriers in the area charge, this one can be a little bit hit and miss, but it can be a good way, if you know good, skilled farriers, it can be a good sounding board to talk to other people who are aware of what it costs them to run a business and see what they're charging. So I will often do that. I'll call other farriers and I'll say, hey, I'm thinking about putting my prices up. This is kind of what I'm seeing in terms of expenses. Does this seem reasonable? And it's just a good sounding board to know if you're out to lunch or not. Now, I think too often we worry about the second and third thing. So we worry about our skill level. We'll think about that. And we'll think about what other farriers are charging. Sometimes we get these backwards. We think the most about what other farriers in the area are charging, and then our skill level, and then our expenses. It should be the other way around, because you still have to make a living wherever you are shoeing horses, right? If the other farriers in the area are literally charging half of what they should be, that doesn't mean that you should be charging half of what you should be. There is a point that the market will only bear so much, and that is true. But more often than not, if farriers collectively are charging too little for an area, they're kind of all collectively lying to themselves, really, about like, oh, the market won't bear. So I think of an area that I shoe in, there's plenty of money there, but most of the farriers chronically undercharge because they think the money isn't there. But
it almost becomes a confidence thing, because as soon as you give somebody a price increase, you hand them that sheet of paper that tells them it's going up next time, and then they fire you, that means you weren't good enough. You weren't worth that amount, and nobody wants that sort of slap in the face, right? So I think a lot of people, I've heard a lot of farriers come up with a lot of excuses for not giving price increases. Just the reasons that you just said there, like, oh, the market won't bear it or whatever. But then you hear about some magnet treatment or something that the horse got for $300 3 times last month, and they were willing to spend that, but what about their feet? So I think you will lose some people, but in the end, you have to do it, or you're losing out to the magnetic blanket.
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So sometimes, like this year, our expenses go up a lot. How do you practically raise prices when they go up a lot like that?
Okay, so I think there's a couple of things you can do. One is a method that was shown to me by a guy. He has this very obscure podcast called the Mullins Farrier Podcast. You might not have heard of it. No, so Brian taught me this, and just to have a new client price. And at first I was kind of resistant to doing this, but the more I thought about it, the more it really made sense, right? Because if you have good clients, essentially what ends up happening is you put your prices up, they still will get a regular increase, but you can step up at a higher amount at a time on the new clients, right? And so in a sense, whenever you take on a new client, there's risk associated with that. You don't know if they're good payers. You don't know if their horses are good, right? So basically what ends up happening is you charge them a fairly significantly higher, but still fair price, right? And so that over time, as inflation keeps working its way up, then that price just becomes the new normal price. And ultimately, the rest of your clients will be brought up to that level. But they, in a sense, get a loyalty discount. They get to wait before their prices go up, similar to what the supply store does for us, where they're buying in bulk and basically holding the old price for us. There's a sense in which we can do that for our loyal customers, but then when new people come on, it makes sense for them to be at a higher rate. So if you have a lot of turnover in your business, you can kind of work your way up that way as well. If, especially when you're in the building phase of the business, right? And if you're plenty busy, it makes a ton of sense. Why would you take people on at the same price if you're run off your feet, right?
Exactly. In some cases, if you have a full book and you're taking on somebody else, by raising your price, you're going to have to get rid of another client. So you might as well, first of all, pick the ones that you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, geez, I have to go to that barn today. And it's not such a sting to let that go when you're actually earning more on the new one. The other added benefit is on the confidence level, like I was just talking about before. If you hand those people that newer price and they're paying it, you all of a sudden wonder why you're charging everybody else less. And it makes you a little more confident to increase your prices. It doesn't have to be to that level, but even to compensate for inflation, you're all of a sudden like, well, I'm not priced out of the woods. This is actually doable for people. That was the added benefit I found from that.
There's one more point I want to make on that. But just in terms of putting your prices up, there does come a point where you just have to put people's price up to what's fair. So I have a price increase coming up next June. So that's, what is that, like 8 months away, 7 months away? And I'm telling people right now. Usually I would give them 2 cycles notice. So I'm telling people now, and I'm also telling them that I hope that I never have to do a price increase this significant in terms of percentage. Again, it may happen, but I'm hoping it doesn't. So I'm telling people about that now, giving them a big heads up and trying to be fair. And people have really appreciated that. But again, I could either stretch it out over a couple of years and try to do it a little bit. But then again, I'm always going to feel like I'm behind the 8 ball in terms of pricing. So, and people seem to hate it, whether you put your prices up a little bit or a huge bit. They seem to hate it the same amount. So I don't know. I'm just like ripping the Band-Aid. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They hate it more when you don't give them notice of it.
Yes, absolutely.
That's true.
I was actually surprised at how every single person has mentioned that. Thank you for giving me this much notice on it. So that way they're not feeling pressured into it. They can kind of make up their minds. And then too, I also wonder psychologically if this, like over time, they kind of acclimatize to the idea. Like maybe their first reaction would be like, no way. Like, I'm not paying that. And then like in 2 months, they'll be like, I probably shouldn't. That's a lot. And then maybe my next spring, it'll be like, it's not that bad. I don't know.
Everything else has gone up. Yeah.
That's right. So,
well, and I spoke to a farrier from Argentina where their inflation is 7% or something every quarter. It's something crazy. And there, all the farriers every quarter raise their prices because they have to. If they don't, by the end of the year, they're probably in the same situation as that gentleman that you got his prices.
I should actually read you guys a text from my client. I had this written down somewhere. This is one of the things too, where this is one of my best clients. I've been shoeing for her for, goodness, I don't even know how long, a really long time. Really nice lady, really nice horses, you know, someone that you don't really want to, you don't want to lose that kind of a client, right? So I sent her this text and explaining everything that was going on. Of course, I'm sweating bullets like, oh man, like I hope she doesn't leave and whatever. So anyway, I said the whole thing, told her what the prices were going up to, told her why, and told her I was giving her a big heads up. So the wording I used in my original text was that I was planning on a substantial price increase. So she writes back, hello, Andrew. That has to be the most, in quotes, substantial text I've received from you. Winky face. I understand your logic and the necessity of your increase. I also appreciate the heads up. I'm not looking for another farrier anytime soon. Very happy with the care you provide. See you next appointment. Right? And by and large, that's most of the response I've gotten. You feel kind of awful putting your prices up. But I have to remind myself, one of the reasons these people are hiring me and a lot of you, it's not just because of what you do on their horses, but the care that you provide them too, right? You schedule properly, you call them back, you know, you have the time to take care of their horses. That's a big part of what they're hiring you for, not just the price point that you're at.
It's a service business. What do you do with the money once you've made it?
I don't know who came up with this first, but my grandfather always said, watch your health, not your money. So one day while I was watching my health, somebody stole my money. It was my grandfather. In an inflationary environment, saving your money, you can kind of equate this, picture a big pile of ice cubes that's slowly melting. That's kind of what your cash is doing in an inflationary environment, right? The purchasing power of your money is just kind of melting away. So that makes a very inflationary environment like we're in difficult. I'll start off by saying that.
My mattress is melting.
There you go. So if you're buying depreciating assets, that's even worse. Can someone give me a definition on what a depreciating asset is?
A vehicle.
Sure.
Lose value over time.
Something that loses value over time. Yeah. So a vehicle is a great classic example, right? So if you're sinking every penny that you're making into things that are going down in value, which a lot of people do, you know, if you're living for the moment, that's what you tend to, you know, spend your money on. That's going to make an inflationary environment significantly worse, right? Those things are actively losing your money. So the trick is, if possible, to put your money into hard assets. Does anyone know what a hard asset is? Or can give me an example?
Real estate other than 2008.
Okay, yeah. Real estate other than 2008.
Precious metals.
Something like that. Precious metals, okay. Yeah, so something that by and large is going to hold value, purchasing power, or possibly even increase over time. So there's a bunch of things. A lot of them require some know-how, which again is part of the reason why this is a difficult time to know what to do with your money. Real estate is a good example, right? Stocks can be an inflation hedge, but you really have to know what you're doing. That's a whole other discussion on the investment side, right? Something that's really, really practical is just things like buying shoeing supplies things that won't go bad, right? Like nails and rasps. If there's a price increase going up, if you park $1,000, say, into nails and rasps, and you can store them somewhere where they won't go bad, then you've essentially locked in the purchasing power of that $1,000, right? And that $1,000 is going to buy you less rasps and nails next year, especially if your supply store is telling you that they have a price increase scheduled. So that sort of thing, if you have the space for it, you're locking in the purchasing power of your dollars when you make that purchase. Does that make sense? It's tough, but there's some practical things you can do like that.
Any closing thoughts?
Just to kind of recap what we said, be aware of what inflation's doing, right? Inflation's been going berserk the last couple of years. So just don't bury your head in the sand. That's really the biggest thing. Actually sit down and kind of go over your business numbers a little bit. Make sure you know roughly where things are at and if you're making any money. Don't be afraid to put your prices up if it's fair to do so, right? And I think more often than not, what is actually fair is more than you think it is, but you won't know that unless you look at the numbers of your business, right? And how much your expenses are going up. Remember that it's fair to charge a fair price. We are running businesses, not philanthropic organizations. Right? So,
well, thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you learned by the end of this that inflation is no small thing to ignore, and we have to take steps to keep ourselves on track financially in times like this. A big thank you goes out to Andrew DeVisser and his family for sharing their space with us and allowing me to record this. And if you're in the market for a new forge, check out Andrew's website, FletcherForgeandTool.com, and see the ones that he makes there. Andrew has put a lot of thought into these things and considered many of the aspects that we on a daily basis may find a little bit irritating with our forges. One of those things being how easy, or in most cases difficult, it is to access the orifices to clean them if they get bunged up. Another one of Andrew's innovations was that he made the forge super easy to dismantle so that you could change the liner easily and efficiently. Anybody who works out of a trailer will appreciate that one. And before I let you go, one last thing. Dr. Simon Curtis has another webinar coming up on December the 3rd. This one should be a goodie. The digital cushion and support techniques using pads and more, with Jonathan Nunn and Mark Trussler as his co-hosts. Here is his description. When we talk about the digital cushion and using digital support, what do we mean? The digital cushion, plantar hind, palmar front, is the large mass of fatty tissue occupying the back and bottom part of the foot. It is the largest structure in the equine foot. Digital support is a generic term for the use of the frog and digital cushion to bear weight. This usually unloads the hoof wall, laminae, and maybe distal phalanx. Originally achieved with heart bars and now using any of the many digital support pads and fillers. In short, the digital cushion is an anatomical structure and digital support a technique in hoof care. We will be exploring all this further in my next webinar. You can get a discount on tickets using the coupon code MULLINS upon checkout. That's MULLINS. This ticket gives you access to the live interactive webinar, full video recording of the webinar afterwards if you can't attend, your questions answered in an open Q&A, certificate of attendance or CPD or CE points, PDF of studies, papers, and key takeaways. All three of the speakers, Jonathan, Mark, and Simon, have done incredible things to educate farriers in this industry. I'm really looking forward to this one. Anyway, until next time, take care of yourselves and each other out there. We'll talk soon.